Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, An Approach to Completing the Texas Regional Flood Planning Process. We'll be getting started with today's presentation in just a moment. I'll be your host for today's presentation, Aaron Doucette, here with AppGeo, and we're going to jump right into things. I'd like to first give everybody a little bit of an introduction. This is part of a larger webinar series offered by AppGeo. This event in particular is a joint collaboration between AppGeo and Huitt-Zollars, and you can see all of our upcoming webinars as well as past recordings at appgeo.com/events. We do have an exciting calendar of events for the 2021 calendar year, so stay tuned for many more to come. First, we wanted to thank all of our attendees representing many areas across the country. And to take a closer look at Texas, the subject of our presentation today, we have a whole number of cities represented. So thank you again for being here. I wanted to provide a quick introduction to our panelists today, starting with my colleague, Matt Hyland. He's a strategic account manager here at AppGeo, who has over 30 years of experience delivering programs and projects for public sector environmental and transportation agencies. We are joined today by Rob Armstrong, Vice President at Huitt-Zollars, who is their Water Resources Discipline Lead and has over 30 years of experience completing studies and projects across the state of Texas. Great guy to have with us this afternoon. We are also joined today by Allison Wood, an associate at Huitt-Zollars, who is in their water resources discipline and has over 5 years of experience in the flood modeling space. So a great panel here, and I really look forward to hearing what they have to say. I'll finish up my portion here with a quick introduction to who AppGeo is. We're a geospatial information consulting firm with over 29 years of experience, coming up on our 30th anniversary, supporting projects in the public and private sector. And beyond the geospatial technology and analysis, we really find ourselves as a leader in strategic planning, data management, cloud transformation, cloud hosting, and of course, application development. As you can see on the right-hand side here, those are just some of the applications we're going to be diving into a little deeper today. And again, our specialty is applying this geospatial knowledge to environmental, transportation, and public sector challenges specifically. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Rob to introduce Huitt-Zollars.
Thank you, Aaron. Huitt-Zollars is a full-service design firm with 500 employees in 20 offices. More than half of our staff reside in Texas, and our corporate headquarters is located in Dallas. Our hydrology and hydraulics experience runs the full gamut of flood risk reduction activities, everything from asset management and master planning to detailed design and floodplain permitting. We have hydrology and hydraulics experience in all 15 of the state's watershed planning regions. We are an employee-owned firm founded in Dallas in 1975. So with that, let's kind of jump right into looking at the agenda for today. So we are going to begin with just a little brief background, and then we're going to discuss really the next four bullets in the agenda. Cover four major sub-processes that we see within the architecture of the entire regional flood planning process. So we're going to walk through each of those four sub-processes, and within each of those, we will discuss and explore some challenges particular to each item, and then also talk about some potential solutions, and then walk through some examples of where we've addressed similar issues in other locations where there might be some application to this regional flood planning process. And then at the end, we'll wrap it up and then have discussion time. So I want to begin, though, by noting that while some of this information is information that has been previously provided by the Water Development Board, this presentation is solely the work of AppGeo and Huitt-Zollars, and no Water Development Board endorsement is implied. These are our thoughts and our opinions about some things that we think will be important considerations when preparing for and executing these regional flood plans. So our goal here today is to present some ideas, advance some dialogue, and help us all to prepare better for the challenges that lie ahead of us. So please be sure and utilize that question box that Aaron discussed as you go through the presentation, so that at the end, when we have our wrap up and discussion, we can answer any questions that may have arisen and kind of have some dialogue on some of the challenges and solutions to this process. So brief background. Most are probably aware, but for those, especially those from out of state, after Hurricane Harvey in 2017, the Water Development Board developed a state flood assessment report. That report was completed in January of 2019. As a result of that, the outcome of that report, Senate Bill 8, Senate Bill 7, and Proposition 8 were developed, and they mandate and provide funding for statewide flood planning and mitigation efforts within the state. The legislation requires that the best available data, science, models, and mapping be used to assess flood risk. So each of the 15 regional flood planning areas within the state, kind of delineated based on major watersheds within the state, they each have a regional flood planning group that's comprised of a diverse set of stakeholders within that region. Each of the regional flood planning groups are responsible for preparing a regional flood plan, and then the 15 regional flood plans will all be rolled up into a statewide flood plan that is due in September of 2024. So, and then as those plans are updated every 5 years, and studies and projects included within those plans are then eligible for funding in the future through these legislative mechanisms. So another bit of background, let's talk about some high-level challenges that we see. There's three main challenges. You'll kind of see a theme throughout the webinar today. These icons to the left of these three lines here kind of illustrate the type of challenge. The first being coordination, collaboration, and communication. It's, each RFP group is required to create and maintain a public website according to the administrative code. These websites can be used to present maps, data, dashboards, other information that's relevant to the flood planning process. And we'll be discussing how to engage stakeholders and communicate. And we think that platform can be a great platform for enhancing the coordination and collaboration within each region. And we'll discuss some ideas of that. But anyway, we think that the coordination, collaboration, communication between all the stakeholders is a significant challenge to this endeavor. So for data, the second line there, data management, the availability, quality, having standards, how to access the data. Again, it's another significant challenge to the regional flood planning process. Senate Bill 8 stipulates that a regional flood plan must use information based on scientific data and updated mapping. We believe that data management for the regional flood plan is going to be a significant undertaking, and we'll cover some of the challenges and solutions within each step of the process here in a few minutes. And then last but definitely not least is sustainability. How do we build a sustainable program? This is not a one and done deal. We're going to, by the time we finish this first regional flood plan in each region, it'll be time to start working towards the next one. And not only will we need to ingest new data, we may need to adapt to new users, new processes, perhaps some new rules, and most definitely available technologies that may change over the next 5 years. So developing a data platform, a data management platform, a sustainable program that we can build from in the future is going to be key to getting the biggest bang for our buck as we move forward in this process. So as we go through this presentation, watch for these symbols to the left, and that'll be kind of a key into what type of challenge is being assessed. So one other thing I'd like to say, we're going to discuss what are some of our perceptions of the biggest challenges. We're very interested in hearing what your perception of challenges may be. And we know those are going to vary based upon, whether you're looking at it from the perspective of a regional flood planning group or from the perspective of a local city. or a state or federal agency may change. And we're very interested in having a discussion of what you may see as the major challenges. So real quick, kind of an overall approach to the regional flood planning process. Shown in blue here are each of the four major sub-processes that we see. So we start, of course, with predict and propose, where we need to continuously improve data, models, model different scenarios and propose projects. And then we move around to prioritize and review, where we're going to want to use the best available science and technologies to visualize and present complex information, gain consensus on the most beneficial projects within the region, and then deliver the best possible regional plan. But then in the future, then we're also going to need to implement these projects. We're going to look to apply for funding, complete the most beneficial projects, report on the status throughout the project implementation, and keep the public informed. And then overall, we're going to need to monitor and inform through all of these processes. We need to provide information to stakeholders, forecasters, responders, and the public, both during the planning process as well as afterwards, to show the success of some of these projects. Those are all going to be key. And so whereas the regional flood plan requirements, the task ahead of us for developing this regional flood plan in each of these 15 regions is primarily focused on the first two, the predict and propose and the prioritize and review, and we'll spend most of our time today discussing those. It's also important, though, to be looking ahead to where we're going with this data so that we can build a sustainable program where we can utilize and build platforms where we can provide this data in the future as well. So it's always important to look at where we're going. So we'll spend a little time discussing those. So with that, let's jump right into this first section of predict and propose. And really the predict and propose, there's really a circular flow within this step. We begin with assessing models and data. We're going to work with stakeholders to understand what's available. It's going to be a big key to this is what is available, how accurate and complete is it, and where are there gaps. It's going to be a big aspect of this study. Then, of course, we're going to need to update the models and data. We're going to want to analyze various scenarios, and that analysis, some of it may be detailed models. Some may be just based on engineering judgment without detailed modeling. We'll get into that a little bit later as well. And then, of course, that takes us around to proposing projects and the next stage of prioritize and review. So let's take a look at some of the challenges and solutions associated with this predict and proposed state. So, one of the biggest challenges is how do I gather my data? How do I manage, store, and view my data? How do I share data within the region? How do I update that data as new revisions are made so that we're not continuously starting from scratch? How do we automate processes so that we are updating as we go along? How do I deal with data that's missing? How do I deal with data that's not geolocated? And how do I deal with data that perhaps is using outdated technology or rainfall values? So some of the solutions to those challenges, beginning with collaboration, communication, and coordination. The first step is going to be coordinating with other agencies that may have large-scale data, hydraulic models, LiDAR data, parallel ongoing modeling efforts going on within the state. But we're going to need to, one of the solutions is going to be to establish protocols for transmitting and receiving updated information from all these agencies. Some of them may be where we have protocols of communication where we constantly update and receive updates. Some of it may be where we have live links, live feeds to their data. So as their data is updated, the data that the region has access to is automatically updated. Those are the types of things that need to be worked out very early on in the process. And then next, the regional flood planning groups will need to reach out to the local entities. The success of the program is going to rely heavily on data from stakeholders, and an ongoing and proactive research program is going to be critical. We'll discuss that a little more in detail later. The Water Development Board, of course, is gathering data, making it available and accessible to the regional flood planning groups to download. But there will also be additional data that's needed, and we'll discuss that a little bit later as well, and some of the avenues for obtaining and managing that data. Local jurisdictions could choose to utilize existing email lists to solicit information and perhaps send that information, as far as known flooding issues, comments on proposed solutions, comments on proposed projects, and the need for future studies. All that information perhaps could be relayed directly to a centralized location for viewing by the regional flood planning group. And cities, local jurisdictions copy all that information, but perhaps sending local citizens to the flood planning group might ease that coordination effort and help with the strict timeline that we have for developing these. Overall, the needs for data must be clearly and concisely identified early on so that we can develop this robust plan and make sure that local jurisdictions are able to demonstrate their need for funding and then receive the highest rank possible for those projects. Additional solutions on the data side, within we'll have the targeted outreach program where we've gathered all this data and we understand what we do have and what we don't have. And then we're going to need to cooperate to collect new data in the region where that's feasible, or we might have to fill in missing data from using historical sources. But we recommend a single environment in which all of the geospatial data and models can be transformed into compatible formats and open standards to facilitate region-wide analysis. This may require processes that update models to the latest software versions or automate geospatial location of models. And this also may include developing decision-making processes that are specific to each flood planning group, but then is communicated with the stakeholders. For example, let's say a local jurisdiction has a existing FEMA flood map. So they've got maybe it's hard copy, maybe it's electronic, geospatial, but the data used to develop that flood map was a HEC2 model, and that HEC2 model electronically has not survived. All that is available is a hard copy. So what process is going to be used? When will that data go ahead and be updated? When will that data be utilized and when will it not? What will the process be for doing that? That needs to be determined early on and then clearly communicated with the local stakeholders, local jurisdictions, so that we can collaboratively find a way to enhance and utilize the best available data, and that everybody understands what the processes are going to be. Some additional data solutions, some outside the box ideas that might be applicable in some areas where we don't have models. Perhaps a Python script to automate extraction of water surface elevation data from base level engineering or FEMA models for an area of interest, so that we kind of decrease the amount of time spent doing that. Utilizing LiDAR to extract roadway elevations and then compare those roadway elevations to known water surface elevations for flooding events to determine the depth of overtopping at roadways and to understand the impact a roadway may have on a water surface elevation that's not reflected in the base level engineering. We're going to have to use engineering judgment, and perhaps there might be some times where we use assumptions to automate the inclusion of bridge structures in models at certain locations. Probably not going to have the time or money to do that everywhere, but maybe where we know there are issues, then having automated routines to do that are going to enhance our ability to meet the schedule and budget needs of the project. Perhaps automate updating rainfall values. These are all some of these at various stages of conceptual ideas. Some are in place, but we have the tools to execute these and enhance our understanding of flood risk, and these automated solutions are going to be important. This image on the right actually shows a proof of concept in a similar vein completed by AppGeo and Huitt-Zollars using LiDAR and aerial data and expert automated systems to identify culvert locations along roadways where there is no record of where that asset may lie in the past. Those types of outside the box ideas are going to be important to meeting the challenges we have on these projects. So then sustainability. Some solutions related to sustainability within this predict and propose state. The processes and procedures that we set up to collect and process data. It's going to be a continuous ongoing effort, but a platform needs to be secure and reliable and needs to be ready to scale up and scale down as needed, perhaps a cloud-based solution in some regions. We need to make it easy for stakeholders to provide comments on the data and to provide data updates. We need to implement security rules to make sure that only trusted personnel can actually update data and modify it. We need to institute a data tracking tool, such as is shown at the bottom of the screen here, where we understand what information has been gathered, what data has been used, what software has been used, has a cost been developed, is there an ongoing study, those types of things we need to track. So we collect this information one time, and then it gets updated in the future. But we can only go through the pain of collecting this data from scratch one time. All of the data should be linked, so that similar to a base flood elevation viewer, you can perhaps download models by clicking on a watershed. That type of automation is going to be key to efficiency, not only in this first 5-year program, but definitely for sustainability as we move forward to future programs. And eventually, you're going to want all the information received to be linked in a spatial element. We'll discuss that more in the next section about the importance of tracking down all of this information. So real quick, an example of data management and coordination and collaboration. Our Fort Bliss expansion project was a major military construction program that is unequaled in the history of the Corps of Engineers in carrying out a $4.8 billion expansion program over a 7-year period. This was an enormous communication, collaboration, and coordination effort. As a part of a joint venture, our efforts included managing the coordination between 7 core districts and 50 design build contractors, developing and managing the 50 design build RFPs. In addition, in-house design of over $1 billion of infrastructure in 150 separate packages, and stormwater master planning for the areas of expansion as well as the historic main cantonment within the base. And keys to success for this project were proactive development of communication protocols and processes. We had to establish all that up front so that we could make sure we maintain coordination between all the multiple stakeholders within the process. And then managing activities to the aggressive schedule that the project held. Letting the schedule deadlines in part drive the approach to issues that arose during the project. So we see several parallels to the coordination and schedule challenges for this planning effort. So the team's success on that project led Troy Collins from the 4th Worth District Corps of Engineers to proclaim that execution of the Fort Bliss expansion program is the best, in his opinion, of any major construction program in the DoD. And it's, again, we want to underscore that it's early communication protocols and processes and adherence to schedule are going to be keys to success. And with that, I'll pass it off to Matt now to give another great example of collaboration and data management.
All right, thank you, Rob. Recently, in the last few years, AppGeo worked with the Texas Natural Resources Information System to help them to develop and implement sustainable processes for a statewide parcel data layer. Now, land parcels are used in a variety of applications and are also important in the flood planning and risk assessment type work as well, as we'll get into a little bit more later. The beginning of this was actually reaching out to all 254 counties to understand what they were doing with their parcel data, how they were managing it, and how we might be able to get access to that. We also helped make recommendations to some of the counties to improve their internal GIS procedures to better maintain that data. We also, along with those recommendations, provided estimated costs and benefits of doing that, and to help them justify additional investments internally on these new processes. Now, we also helped create a statewide data standard, a common data standard to be used by everyone as they send in their data. And we developed ETL processes for importing that data and also for quality checking it as it's coming in. So that ultimately what we end up with is a statewide topologically correct parcel data layer that includes a variety of the most commonly used attributes. And this is now available from Tenris, either as a download or via web service. So we anticipate that similar data compilation, ongoing updates may be needed for other flood-related data sets in your flood planning area. And that brings us to the next stage, which is prioritize and review. Now, in this process, you've put together your data and your models and so forth, and you've come up with you've identified some risk areas and some projects to mitigate those risks. And so now you need to present all that information to your stakeholders and impacted people so that they can understand what's being proposed and so that you can receive their input on those projects. So then once you receive that input, you may need to go back to your to your previous stage and maybe update some of your data, maybe modify some of those project plans, and then represent. So there will be kind of a back and forth cycle there as well. But ultimately, you'll get to a final prioritization of your proposed projects. And that will go into your regional flood plan. And then from there, you'll go on to implement those projects. Now, Allison is going to discuss a few of the challenges that you may encounter in this prioritization process.
Thanks, Matt. I just wanted to briefly touch on some challenges related to the process of project review and prioritization. So the Water Development Board is pulling together some of the publicly available statewide data sets already. However, there will be gaps where you may need to gather data from local entities or analyze areas that don't have data. It's important to note that not all of the projects as part of these plans will be engineering infrastructure projects. There will be studies where you're collecting new data or creating models for areas that have insufficient data. These types of projects are going to also be eligible for funding, but you still need to be able to quantify what is their impact so that you're able to rank them against the project list. So Rob talked about how we can make assumptions and gather some of the technical data that we don't already have, but there are several other components that are going to be taken into consideration for funding. Things like quantifying what is the impact to lives and infrastructure, or what is the socioeconomic vulnerability of the area I'm studying. Things like these are going to be required to be able to compare and prioritize these projects. And that data is going to need to be gathered and managed in a way that's efficient, organized, and consistent. Getting information from stakeholders is also going to be key, and Matt will address some tools for this in just a moment, but let's jump into those first items. So the Water Development Board will be providing guidance on the actual scoring criteria, but it will be up to entities themselves to gather the values that will be used for that scoring. Some of the data layers I have shown here are already available or will be available through that GIS data hub. But again, there will be areas where you may have to rely on local data or where you'll have to complete your process. Things like property values and population data, these are going to be easily obtained through parcel and census data. Other items may have to be inferred. For instance, if you're trying to come up with the number of living units impacted by a flood study or a flood project, you may have to overlay parcel, census, and zoning data to estimate that. For things like looking at acres of farm or rangeland impacted by a project, you could estimate that by filtering out land cover data by vegetation type or things like that. But most importantly, anything that can be automated should be automated due to the time and budget constraints we have surrounding these regional flood plans and the state flood plan. So we recommend that a single geospatial tool be used where you define the project area, like I have shown here in my watershed on the left. and then link live data layers. So that's part of that sustainability, where you're not having to manually update these layers, but link active layers to where with a single click, you can acquire the parameters that you need to prepare a study or project to be part of the regional and then state flood plan. So all of this data that you gather here, like Rob said earlier, should be linked to the geospatial file so that you can easily access any of the project data that you need through a visualization tool. One example I want to quickly walk through, Huitt-Zollars was the project manager for the Greater Houston Flood Mitigation Consortium. This was a group of nonprofit organizations and researchers that came together post-Harvey to think on and address flooding risk and mitigation opportunities in the Houston area. One piece of this project was what's shown here. We compiled data from stormwater projects and studies across each of the watersheds in Harris County. And by mapping these out, we were able to determine what was the money spent per watershed and compare that to population as well as previous hurricane damage data. So we compiled not only what existing infrastructure and studies there were, but what was ongoing and then what was already planned. And so this report helped the county both understand previous investments, understand what the planned efforts were, and prioritize future needs in a manner that was equitable. The consortium went on further to produce neighborhood plans for 4 different neighborhoods that were severely impacted by Hurricane Harvey. They identified risk and vulnerabilities as well as specific opportunities in those neighborhoods for mitigation and resiliency. So plans like these and programs like these can serve as a baseline for the regional flood plan and then further along the state flood plan. So now I'm going to hand off to Matt to cover the communication and data visualization solutions.
All right, thank you, Allison. As we've previously mentioned, we're suggesting a platform for each regional flood planning group that facilitates collaboration, coordination, and communication with all your stakeholders, decision makers, and the general public. This same platform will help you manage your data, track projects, and present some very complex information in easily digestible forms for a non-technical audience. And finally, we're suggesting a cloud-hosted solution that can help you get started quickly, ensure your security, ensure broad access to a lot of people, and reduce your risk and your investment of already limited staff time. Our FloodSmart, or Flood System for Mapping, Aggregation, and Reporting for Texas, is one example of one of these types of tools. Now, we built this as a proof of value application for the Water Development Board and in support of their preparing the 2019 State Flood Assessment Report. And here we show parcels, imagery, roads, and flood inundation areas based on the water depth for particular floods. So we used flood models, imagery, and parcel data, roadways data that's all already available from TNRIS. And as you adjust your view of the map or adjust the slider bar, then you see that the extent of flooding is updated on the map, the population affected and the property value affected is updated on the chart on the right. So again, this is a simple proof of value application that was created just for Beaumont and Port Arthur area, but it shows how some of this information can be pulled together to really provide a clear picture of what's happening for a broad audience. Now, beyond that, we are working with Huitt-Zollars and building on the FloodSmart concept and envisioning new and more innovative ways to present complex flood-related information in easily understood visualizations. We want to do this to enhance communication, coordination, and collaboration, and to make sure that you can get started quickly and maintain sustainability. So this next slide is a prototype that we've put together for some more types of visualizations that we're imagining. So in this case, a user would go to the site and log in just as you do for many other applications. And in this case, we've put kind of a default basic design to it. We could make this match your existing styling or come up with something completely new. People will be able to select which model they want to view and then go and visualize that. And then here again, you'll see a display that looks very much like FloodSmart, but again, you'll be able to view the current flood visualization based on current conditions. So with a 1% flood probability, you get some fairly confined flooding there, and you see the updates to population affected. But as you move the slider, then you see a greater extent of flooding and greater impact at those parameters. Now we can also bring in transportation risk assessments as an example of other data we might use, and we could look at roads or bridges or culverts that maybe are damaged or out of service based on the extent of flooding. And so then we could also then go back and say, okay, now we've seen the impacts of the flooding as it is now. We've proposed this project. Now we're going to go and compare what the before and after would look like. So here you would see, again, we've got the proposed project description. We've got a different visualization of the population and property impacts. We have a map legend showing the extents of the proposed project. Then, as you slide the flood probability slider, you'll see again that the previous flooding in blue has now been reduced to flooding only inside the water accumulation, only inside the detention pond. However, at the more severe flood stage, you'll see that there are still some outlying areas there that are still being impacted, although this major area of the neighborhood that we were looking at is still safe from flooding. Now, we'll also be able to bring in some 3D views of projects. This is just a sample of LiDAR available that's from USGS, but gives you an idea of additional types of visualizations we could include. Finally, your constituents could come in and leave comments. And because they've had to log into the system, we can automatically capture their contact information. They can enter their comments and then submit the form, and that goes into a database that can then be automatically distributed to the planning group members or to the appropriate people. And again, because they're behind a login, you can capture information about the user and for the information that was displayed when they made the comment. So you could then track that comment to go and research a specific issue, and then you could either get back to that commenter saying, oh no, you misunderstood this, or yes, you're right, we'll go and include that into our project plan. So, so then after you've used your collaboration platform to go through that review and revise cycle, and you've completed your prioritization of projects, then you'll move on to the next stage, which is implementing the projects. And in the implement projects process, you'll do things like apply for funds, initiate your projects, monitor your project status, report on project status, and complete projects, ultimately providing information back to your predict and propose stage to update your data and your models reflecting completed projects. So the great thing here is that you don't have to have a separate system for tracking your projects, because you can just pass that information across within the system so that the project information automatically gets updated here. And then you can also provide an interface for selected people to go in and make updates to the project status. throughout the life cycle. Some of the challenges in this stage will include things like making sure that you keep everybody up to date on what's happening with projects. People will see these things happening in the community and they'll want to know, hey, why has there not been any construction equipment on this site for the last 2 months? Well, they could go to the system and look at it and understand that maybe it's on hold for some reason or something like that. You'll keep that updated information going throughout the entire project life cycle so that everybody that needs to know knows what's going on. And finally, when you complete the project, you can roll that back into your current models so that your predictions and proposed projects can then be reevaluated. One example of a similar project that we've done is for Nevada Department of Wildlife, where we help them to track conservation projects. We created public-facing dashboards and maps. We allow secure users to go in and update and create projects, create their extents, enter information about them, about funding. They can attach related documents, they can generate reports, and so forth. And again, because it's cloud hosted and password secured, we help them ensure that only the right people can edit the data and that the system that's the information that's going out to the public is remaining current. Now that brings us to our final sub-process, which is monitor and inform. And while this is not technically part of the overall regional flood planning process, it is important because as the regional flood planning groups, you'll be developing data that could be very useful to a wide range of users, including flood forecasters, emergency responders, and the media and other people who might need to know that information. So those people will be monitoring real-time data such as weather feeds, river gauges, and road closures. And based on your models, they can be looking at where we expect impacts to occur so that when the current conditions line up with the scenarios that have been run, we can begin to see where we expect things to happen. And that kind of feeds into the whole forecasting and public notification process. Finally, as those severe weather events are happening, they can record the actual conditions that occurred and then feed that back to you so that you can include it in your data models to refine and tweak and continuously improve how well we can predict what the impacts will be of these severe storms. So just some of the challenges in this area will be that you need to be able to share data easily. And so when you've got some really good data and somebody needs it, it can't be like a 2-day process to get it to them. So it needs to be updated and reshared frequently. Web services are great for this. You can also do automated transfers and FTPs and that sort of thing. Finally, when you're providing data to the public, you need to be prepared for huge increases in usage. And so this next project will illustrate a little bit about that. So in 2014, AppGeo built the Drive Texas system for TxDOT. Now this is a public-facing web application that provides near real-time road closures information, road conditions information. So field crews are out observing what's going on. When a road starts to flood, they'll enter it into a mobile system, and then that's updated on the public site within about 5 minutes. And so it's a great system that really has stood the test of time and has provided some valuable information to people, especially during and immediately after Hurricane Harvey. Now, normally Drive Texas was seeing about 1,000 sessions per day in average times. When Hurricane Harvey struck, those sessions jumped to more than 500,000 sessions per day and that continued for about a 7-day period. And there was no performance degradation or downtime during all of that. And that is really thanks to the Google Cloud infrastructure that this system was built on, because all of that redundancy and scalability was built right in. So another project we're currently working on is for Harris County Flood Control District. And we are taking in their data from existing gauges and data feeds and building a user-friendly dashboard for them to be able to digest a lot of information and provide that over to the flood warning system. So it's important that to summarize this section, it's important to remember that we need to think about the future when we're collecting and managing data for our current tasks, and make sure that what we're doing is sustainable and shareable so that it can benefit the most people. So finally, I'll try to wrap up real quickly here so we can save time for discussion. We've presented some ideas on how to improve coordination, communication, and collaboration. We've talked about some challenges with data, availability, quality, and standards and access. And we've talked about sustainability, about implementing repeatable processes and procedures that support good programs and policies, and that we continuously improve our data, our models, and our tools and our communications with all those involved. So the photo you see here is when from the roof of my office in 2017, and those clouds are the remnants of Hurricane Harvey headed east and finally getting the heck out of Texas. Like many of you, I had friends and family impacted from Corpus Christi all the way over to Lafayette and beyond. And there was a lot of suffering and sorrow associated with that storm, but there was also a lot of help, heart, and hope. And so, unfortunately, we won't be able to prevent future storms like Harvey or even bigger ones. But we have an opportunity to pull together and reduce the suffering caused by such events. So we at AppGeo and Huitt-Zollars are committed to doing our part to assist. We're available to further explore these and other ideas that you may have for your upcoming regional flood planning efforts. Just simply contact me or Rob and we'll schedule a virtual meeting. We'll be glad to talk. So now let's turn it back over to Aaron, and we'll be happy to try to answer any questions or just listen to any suggestions that you might have.
All right. Thank you, Matt, and thank you to all of our presenters today. Again, you can ask a question using the Go to Webinar Questions panel as shown in this image here. And it looks like we have the first couple coming in, and we've got about 10, 11 minutes for questions. So I encourage you to ask away and start an interesting dialogue here. Let's see. So we have our first couple questions coming in here. We have, how do you include things like paper maps in the plans that might not have been digitized yet? Maybe, yeah, Rob, do you want to start off with that?
You bet, that's a great question. Yeah. Matter of fact, we also, I think, Aaron, if you could go to the slide that we hit a couple of slides anticipating some questions, and that was one of the questions that we kind of thought through. Don't know if that's available, but there we go. We think that some of the things that are going to need to be done, and this may vary between each region as to how they approach this, but we recommend coming up with a flow chart that'll be used within the region so that all of the stakeholders within the region understand what the rules are going to be and what the processes are going to be and what the the approach might be, to scan and georeference the data. You might alter how you treat that data depending upon whether there's a flood mitigation project proposed for that area. If there's not, then maybe that's all you do is you scan it and you have that record of the floodplain, or maybe you had no other record. But maybe you need to then, if there is a proposed project, you look and see, is there another study completed? Yes or no? Let's assume there's not. Well, then maybe you don't have the money to develop something from scratch, so you use some conceptual estimates for flood planning. If you've got a map, you might be able to infer significant head loss at some existing structures, and so maybe you can then likewise use some engineering judgment to assess what improvements might be made through implementing a project, even without doing any modeling, just using some engineering judgment. So I think it's going to vary case by case, but I think the important thing is to take away is that developing a process that will be followed within the region would be a key item, I think, to communicate with the stakeholders.
Great. We have a couple more questions coming in, so I want to make sure we get to all of them. This one might hand it to Matt first. In one of the previous slides, there was a table that shows the building damage associated with a certain flooding value. What was the methodology used to estimate damage for various flood depths? So I assume they might be asking about that Flood Smart viewer there. Matt, do you have any input into that methodology?
The methodology for that we've presented here is based on what Water Development Board has provided, and then Huitt-Zollars and AppGeo have put together some of our thoughts and incorporated that into it. So, Rob, did you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's what would be used is going to vary again from region to region, and maybe within the areas within the regions, whether you're pulling in publicly available data for property values, for asset values, and there are, of course, a lot of procedures and processes that FEMA and the Corps of Engineers have developed for walking through that you could link in. Again, the key is going to be to automate this. You're not going to have time on a case-by-case basis to go through these and look at them individually. So you're going to need to think through for your region what's right to establish that data. Allison, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to add, like you said, there's FEMA data and HAZUS data out there that has damage curves. So if we have things like square footage of a impacted area, we could definitely use that. But there are publicly available equations and data that we can plug in to automate that process. And that's already been vetted by the engineering community.
Excellent. I want to make sure we get to all of these. This one's a little bit of a lengthy one, but I will do my best here. So RFPGs are going to be in a rush to develop plans and will have to use best available information due to lack of funding and time. In some instances, this information is out of date and does not represent present or future conditions, such as new NOAA Atlas 14 rainfall. This could result in lack of identification for needed projects. So what are your thoughts about bridging these gaps, gaps in data availability from the outdated to the more modern?
Right. I think that touches on some of the points that Allison was making earlier about either estimating or using professional judgment, engineering some type assumptions to fill in that information. Do you want to add to that, Allison?
Sure, and I think that also touched on some of the things that Rob presented. The first step would be understanding if that change in data is going to make an impact to your project. Like you said, it's the best available data you have, and understanding, is that good enough for what you're using it for, or does it require an update? And then Rob walked through some of the ideas for assuming data so that you could quickly produce models if you don't have updated models. And you can do the same with rainfall. You know, we've developed Python tools where you can quickly extract that rainfall data. And if you have the model available, you can just plug it in and rerun. But if not, you can use some of these processes that we've discussed, the concepts of coming up with quick estimated models that will get you the answers that you need to develop an application to either further study it or implement a project.
And if I could add to that also, I think one of the key things is going to be to establish within a region what your approach is going to be, so that all the stakeholders understand what that approach is going to be. Like you said, there's a lack of time and money to study everything in detail. So you may just have to use the best available data you have and not let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and move forward with what you may say, you know what, the difference in the rainfall is significant enough, I can't move forward with what I have. Well, then you might have to use some engineering judgment to assess what the impacts might be. And if you don't feel like in a given project that you can apply judgment and come up with a reasonable estimate, then you may want to flag that as an area for future study, because that is something that you can include in the plans, is areas that need to be studied further. And you can kind of use that assessment of what you think the impacts might be once you finally get the data you need to make a more accurate assessment of what the flooding conditions are and what the impacts of proposed solutions might be in that area. But again, underscoring the importance of making sure that within the region, everybody understands what process you're going to follow.
Excellent. We have one question here just asking, will a recording of today's session be available? The answer is a resounding yes. We will have that published on our website, and we will also email it out to everyone who registered today, and you can share it as widely as you choose. One more question I'm seeing here. The data process outline, so the process outline for data and data use, is this governed by state law, created by Huitt-Zollars and AppGeo, or some combination of the two?
Could you read that again, Aaron? I want to make sure I'm understanding the question.
So I guess the process outlined for data and data use, is this a system that is outlined by state law, created by Huitt-Zollars and AppGeo, or some combination? So I guess that maybe the data sharing model or data creation model we talked about earlier.
Yeah, or if we're talking about the process diagrams that we use throughout for each of the different sub-processes and the overall processes, that is our AppGeo's and Huitt-Zollars' interpretation of breaking down the overall process that's been outlined by the Water Development Board. If you're talking about the diagram that we showed at the beginning of the Q&A session, that is something that Huitt-Zollars has put together as sort of a decision path for how to handle the situation when you do find insufficient data. I hope that answers the question. Did y'all want to add something to that?
I felt like that answered it. How about you, Allison?
Yeah, and feel free to reach out to anyone here directly if you want to follow up on that, because I'm sure they'd love to get into a deeper dialogue.
Yeah, the Water Development, I'm sorry, excuse me, I'm going to say the Water Development Board is providing a lot of wonderful guidance for the regions to follow. And so the regional planning boards are no doubt getting up to speed on what the Water Development Board is providing. But they're also going to work in some flexibility for regions to decide what's right for them. And in those cases, we're just suggesting that standard processes would help with clarity and buy-in from all the stakeholders.
All right. And it looks like that wraps up all the questions we have so far. If anyone wants to add one real quick, we are still here, but I think we'll hand it back over to our speakers to wrap up with any final thoughts.
Well, I just want to say thank you again, everyone, for attending. This is a great opportunity for us to just to present some things that we're thinking about, and we are again enthusiastic about this whole process and the prospect of helping to improve our flood planning and mitigation efforts in Texas.
And I just add to that ditto to what Matt said, and also to say that we recognize it's a complex problem. There's a short time frame to do it, and we don't have all of the answers, but what we do have is a commitment to serve you and help you. And we're very interested in hearing what you believe some of the main challenges may be, both perspectives from the regional flood planning groups as well as from the local jurisdictions within the planning areas, so that together this can be maybe a beginning of a dialogue to help begin to discuss within the community how we make sure we comply with the Water Development Board goals here.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. And I think with that, we will wrap things up for today. So thank you to all of our attendees. Thank you to all of our panelists. And we look forward to having you join us on our next presentation.